The CPI report, again, shows rising prices. Let's talk about what's really happening in the economy. Inflation is not being caused by COVID or supply lines or Vladimir Putin or the boogeyman. Inflation is being created, it's being caused by massive overspending out of Congress.
Gary, moving to thing number 3, we're talking CPI report. You got in here, will DKI be mature enough to avoid saying, I told you so? I'm not going to bet on that. Gary, thing number 3, January 2025 CPI report comes in hot with an exclamation mark.
Rob, your bet would be correct because the CPI report, again, shows rising prices. Let's talk about what's really happening in the economy. And by the way, we said so. We told the Federal Reserve, we told everybody throughout the entire year and up into the September rate cut, don't cut rates. You don't have inflation under control. So I was not mature enough to avoid saying, I told you so. This is one that we got right. We were wrong about Doge, but dead right on the Fed and inflation. So here we are. The January CPI, which is the last CPI from the prior administration, a lot of people are blaming President Trump for this. No, this took place before he took office. It rose again last month to 3.0%. That was above last month's 2.9%, also above expectations. Even greater concern, the monthly increase was 0.5%, which doesn't sound like a lot. That annualizes to 6.2%. I'll remind everybody again, the target is 2%. And that, in my opinion, is 2% too high. The mandate of the Federal Reserve is stable prices. That's 0% inflation. Right now, we're clocking in at 6.2%, not even close. The core CPI, which excludes food and energy, was up 3.3% and 0.4% for the month. Both of those were above expectations. Food inflation was up. Eggs are getting a ton of media attention. Energy and vehicle prices had been tailwinds for the CPI, but in recent months, those are up. Services pricing remains sticky and has been so for years. This has been a disaster for the Federal Reserve. As much as we were saying, don't cut, don't cut, don't cut, you can see on the chart that we provide, you can see the inflection point in September, right where the Federal Reserve cut rates, the CPI started increasing again. Now, we think the CPI is understated, but either way, inflation is rising and a larger and larger problem every month. Despite knowing his economic history, Jerome Powell has committed the Arthur Burns mistake of letting up on the Fed funds rate before he had inflation under control. This is what led to the massive double dip inflation of the 1970s, and it was a gigantic problem. Everybody, hang on, it's going to get worse.
Gary, talking about Doge earlier and circling back to Doge again with my follow-up. I mean, how does Doge affect this? What's the risk there?
So, Rob, that's the $1 million question. That's actually the $1 trillion question. Basically, what deep knowledge investing has said for years is that inflation is not being caused by COVID or supply lines or Vladimir Putin or the boogeyman. Inflation is being created, it's being caused by massive overspending out of Congress that leads to an expansion of the money supply. When the money supply expands faster than the amount of goods and services in the economy, you have an increase in the price index. That's what we're experiencing. And so I've spent the last few years saying Washington needs to cut spending, and they desperately need to. Now, Doge is working really hard at cutting wasteful government spending. Depending on whose numbers you're looking at, they are already at the rate of cutting $1 to $2 billion of spending a day. They need to get to something like $4 billion a day to get above $1 trillion a year. That adds up to real money. Here's the potential issue. And I'm in favor of Doge cutting this wasteful spending and fraudulent spending. And I mean, we should not be handing out Social Security payments to people who are dead. We just shouldn't be committing fraud. But the issue is we have right now what we've referred to here at Deep Knowledge Investing as a Potemkin economy. It looks good, but it's not real. And so what's happened is the amount of increase in debt that we're having every year is greater than the increase in GDP. And what that means is that the government in wasteful spending is creating a really good GDP number while the productive private economy is suffering. So right now we have basically a recession in the private economy. and we have inflation that leads to stagflation. So the risk here is that if Doge succeeds in cutting spending, and I'm in favor of this, we're going to end up with basically a temporary recession as everything resets. Now, it's going to be painful for a little bit, and President Trump was smart to warn about that. He said, look, guys, if we fix this, it's going to be a problem for a couple of quarters. And I agree with him. It is medicine we need to take, because the alternative is that the government keeps wasting money. We keep printing fake high GDP numbers, and we all pay for that with more inflation. And so I don't think anyone wants that. We're going to have to take our medicine, but it's going to be painful for a couple of quarters if they succeed.